thanks for having me on because I think, as you said, you've got a personal interest in this. So do I. Even though I'm not a homeowner,
Mm,
I'm only 26. The reality is my mum is a leaseholder and she's been completely rinsed on
right.
service charges. Is that basically this idea of a leasehold? I don't know whether we're going to get onto that in a minute,
Yeah.
but buying a home, you think you're going to be a homeowner, but lots of people, they're basically a glorified renter,
Mm,
but they've put all this money behind a certain landlord, behind a certain building. And the reality is, at least with renting, if you're not happy with the service being provided, you can, basically move on to another property. Whereas with leasehold, you're basically owning, you take on all the responsibilities, all of the hassles of owning,
mm,
all the costs and the risks, but you have none of the control and none of the autonomy. So it's a big, big issue. But I guess in England, Wales, Scotland have abolished it years ago.
yeah.
Most of the world don't have it, but we have it because it's this kind of feudal system. It
Mm,
goes back to almost a doomsday book, which is crazy. So before leasehold, we had copyhold,
mm,
deeply unpopular. People rebelled against it, and then it became leasehold.
right.
And there's always a strong argument. Well, look, leasehold you'll always need because you'll need a landlord for an apartment building,
Yeah.
multi-occupancy. You need someone to take over the interest and the stewardship of an apartment block with many different little interests. You need someone to, if the residents are fighting like rats in the sack over maybe some major
Mm,
works, you need someone to go above them and say, no, it's getting done.
mm,
But the thing is that as anyone that studies this knows, England and Wales are among just six countries, they're part of the six that don't use common hold or a form of common hold to organise flats. So the reality is that when people buy a flat in England and Wales, you're basically buying a timeshare, or you're buying the right to occupy the
mm,
property for a set number of years. And that means you're buying a wasting asset. So even if it's 999
mm,
years, the reality is that it can depreciate not just through the length of the lease, but you've got a landlord. Now, what the landlord does, or the freeholder they call them as well, is very important
mm,
to the value of your property. If they don't maintain the block, the value of your lease or the value of your flat
mm,
will go down. And the thing is,
right.
if you can't get rid of the landlord,
Yeah.
you're in a real sticky situation there.
I'm sure 9 times out of 10, then the freeholder, the landlord, is an admirable human being who does,
Oh, it's definitely not
is it
nine
not?
times out of 10. Back in 2016, my old MP, Jim Fitzpatrick, spoke in the Commons. He believed, based on which data, basically that 1.6 billion pounds of overcharging on service charges a year. The system relies on you having a good landlord, but the reality is that you don't really need a landlord
Yeah.
because what we've seen with the Grenfell, post-Grenfell scandal or building safety crisis, some people just call it cladding.
Yeah.
Basically these building owners that in the good times they take everyone's
Yeah.
money, they control everyone's service charges and their household bills. Then in the bad times, with a hit with the dangerous cladding or other fire safety issues, they say, not for me to pay, I'm just a speculator in the income streams. Well, they've got to make up their mind. One minute they're the building owners and they control
Mm,
everything, and the leaseholders are the tenants that have no rights really. The laws in this, we've got about 16 or 18 different bits of legislation. It's all been sticking plastered over many
mm,
years. The reality is that successive governments have wanted to move away from leasehold,
mm,
but the big landlords and the big developers, the Duke of Westminsters of this world,
right.
very, very well financed, they fight tooth and nail to resist meaningful change in this. There's a lady in South London who's got a one-bed flat. It's one of those sort of maisonettes that have been converted. And unfortunately, she's taking action against her solicitor or
Mm,
whatever, because basically the ground rent that was snuck in there basically was going to keep doubling until it gets to about £1 million
really?
in, I think, 50 years' time. So the reality is that leases or any contract, those that draw them or get them drawn up, those contracts inevitably benefit those that are behind them,
Yeah.
never really the consumer. So the thing is, why a developer would go for leasehold is not only will they sell the
Mm,
flats, and I say sell inverted
mm,
commas, because they're basically only selling the right to occupy those flats for a set number of years, but they get the freehold as well. So they're splitting the land. So splitting the kind of land from the flats, as
so
it
does
were.
wait, 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 wait,
So
wait. So does the developer hang on to the freehold?
So the developer hangs onto the freehold as a way of potentially either keeping the freehold, like certain developers that I'm not going to name here tonight because I might get into legal
Yeah.
trouble. But basically, there's some big developers where they'll keep hold of the freehold, and we'll wait for a second on that. But many will keep hold of the freehold. They'll sell the flats as leases without a share in the
Hmm.
freehold, so that, or even a resident management company. A resident management company would basically mean that the leaseholders are still leaseholders, the flat
Yeah.
purchasers, but they would at least control the managing agent. So many developers, all they'll do is they'll keep the
Yeah.
freehold, they'll sell all the flats, leaseholds,
Yeah.
or on leases, and then they'll find some private equity investor, maybe in Monaco or the Cayman Islands, or maybe UK
Yeah.
based, to basically they'll sell that freehold, which will be worth a lot of money because it has something called a ground rent
Yeah.
attached. So each flat will have to pay a ground rent normally in modern days. Before, the ground rent used to be called something called a
Right.
peppercorn, which means literally zero financial value. But when you have a value on it,
Yeah.
it basically means it's a lucrative income stream for an investor. So most of these developers, they would then sell the freehold on, and someone would get the freehold, they'd get the ground rent income. But what wasn't said and what wouldn't be advertised in public is you've got all these other income streams. So you've got placing the insurance the freeholder or the landlord has to do, and they can do it with a broker or a managing agent, and then they can make a commission. So commissions can be as high as 60%, on average 40%. So leaseholders are paying for something that it's not really a service.
Yeah.
They can screw people on service charge. So they can constantly increase the service charge, and there's no real rules and regulations that says once it hits a certain point, you've got to stop.
There's no cap on it, really.
There's no cap. So you can literally keep bringing up the service charge
Yeah.
higher. And their understanding, and it's very, very clever, before the Grenfell situation and all the regulatory fallout from that, they believe that leaseholders are worst enemies. That's true. So leaseholders don't get organised. People are so scared of their property values, they don't want to speak to the media and tell their story about service charge abuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're scared because they don't want to damage their property
That's
prices.
another.
And you know what they want to do?
Yeah.
They want to sell the flat, get out, and leave it to someone else to sort. And the thing is, now with the cladding issue and all of the regulatory fallout of that, people have got these huge bills up to £150,000. There's a case recently in Hertfordshire where a young woman is facing, I think it's £205,000 to remove some cladding off a building she doesn't even own, for a flat she doesn't even own,
Yeah.
for a building she didn't build, for a building she didn't sign off. The whole thing's a joke.